Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is really to get into the heart of speculative fiction. We've got this fantastic analysis, basically a ranking of the 12, well, most important, most groundbreaking fantasy books and series out there. And the great thing about fantasy, its real genius, is that it's like pure imagination. It can be anything, right? It crosses centuries, languages, it can be drama, comedy, mystery, adventure, all of it. So we're not just listing titles here. We want to pull out the key insights, like how did these works actually change the game?
Exactly, and that's crucial because, if you look globally, fantasy isn't just one thing from one place. Actually, the biggest insights often come when you compare, say, the big Western epics with these foundational myths from Asia or Africa that carry, well, just as much weight in their cultures. That contrast, that really gives you the context for everything that comes after.
Okay, so let's dig into that architecture. And, well, you have to start with Tolkien, right? J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, he planned it as one massive book, but it came out in 3 parts, 54, 55. And yeah, the sources all agree. This is the base. This is where it begins for so much modern fantasy. But why? I mean, beyond the incredible world building, why does it still have that genre codifying power, as the source puts it?
Well, I think it's because Tolkien really established the emotional and moral weight of high fantasy. He wasn't just making things up. He was processing his own experiences, from the Western Front in World War I. And you see that in the themes, right? The heavy cost of winning, the reluctant heroes stepping up, that stark picture of industrialized evil, think of Isengard. It gave the whole epic structure this kind of emotional depth that was, well, way beyond just a simple adventure. That's why Middle-earth is still the benchmark, really.
Right, that sort of moral seriousness defined one path. But fantasy doesn't always have to be, grand and tragic. Sometimes it just needs pure, fearless imagination. Which brings us to, the complete opposite end. Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland way back in 1865.
Yeah, and this just shows the amazing range of the genre.
Yeah.
It's still startlingly original. Just a simple story. A girl falls down a rabbit hole, total surreal chaos, and it still feels so
Yeah.
itself, a century and a half later. You can analyze its philosophy forever, but I think its main job was showing the potential for just endless newness in fantasy. That freedom, that's a pillar too. Absolutely essential.
Okay, so we have the epic weight and the surreal newness. And kind of bridging those, maybe, is Ursula K. LeGuin's Earthsea cycle, which she wrote over, 33 years. LeGuin had this gorgeous prose tackling big ideas, wizardry, power, spiritual conflict.
What's really interesting with LeGuin, though, is that even with these big, beautiful worlds, her focus is often on the quiet moments. The source calls it the little stuff. She showed how the vulnerability, the humanity of just one character like Ged or Tenar could feel as huge and important as any epic battle. So if you look at the big picture, her work really defined what fantasy can do when it's at its most thoughtful, making that intellectual depth and character study central.
Okay, so we've set up these sort of Western foundations, the epic, the whimsical, the thoughtful, but now we need to make that global shift you mentioned earlier, because the real picture, the full canon, is much bigger than just Europe and America.
Exactly. And a great place to start is China, with Journey to the West, usually credited to Wu Chengyan, late 16th century. This is, it's foundational to storytelling, period. It's based on a real journey, this 7th century Buddhist monk, Xuanzang, going to India for scriptures. But then it just takes flight. It blends that history with these incredible fantasy elements and the characters. Tang Senzong the monk, Sun Wukong the monkey king, so iconic, Zubaji the pig, Sha Wujing the ogre, the dragon horse. It's got humor, spirituality, amazing action, and even after 400 years, it just pops off the page. Still so exciting.
Then shifting over to Hong Kong and a different tradition, we have Jin Yong's The Legend of the Condor Heroes. Serialized in the late 50s, this is absolutely core to the wuxia genre, right? Martial arts heroes, big sweeping quests.
Yeah, and what Jin Yong did so brilliantly was weave fantasy together with really detailed Chinese history. It's set during the Jinsong Wars, 12th, 13th centuries, really turbulent time. And the story follows these 2 sons of sworn brothers. One, Guojing, is kind-hearted, raised in Mongolia. The other, Yang Kang, is treacherous, raised in the enemy court. Their personal stories get tangled up in centuries of real historical conflict. It's just masterful, using fantasy to make history feel incredibly personal and high stakes.
It really seems like a pattern, using myth to explore history. And we see that very powerfully in Nigeria, too, with works that are just as foundational for African literature. Starting with Dio Fagunwa's Forest of 1,000 Demons, came out in 1938, a pioneering novel in the Yoruba language.
Oh, Fagunwa is huge. Culturally, you can't overestimate his importance. The book is soaked in Yoruba spirituality. It's framed as the memories of this hunter, Akara Ogun, sort of a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story. And the source we use compares him directly to Tolkien or Hans Christian Andersen in Europe, saying he's that foundational for Africa's mythic imagination. He basically set the template for modern Yoruba storytelling, mixing deep mythology with the novel form.
And right there alongside him, you have Amos Tutuola's The Palm Wine Drinkard from 1952. This one's got a really interesting story behind it. It was one of the first African novels published internationally in English, but the English itself was different, very creative, inflected with Yoruba patterns.
Exactly. And that caused a bit of a fuss at first. Some critics, both Western and Nigerian actually, thought it was maybe technically crude because it didn't follow standard English rules. But readers loved it. It was a huge hit worldwide. And the story itself is pure Yoruba folklore, this picaresque hero using his wits and magic to track down his dead palm wine. It proved you didn't need to stick to the old colonial literary models to be successful. A unique voice could totally change the landscape.
The genre keeps changing, keeps evolving, sometimes through humor, sometimes by smashing different genres together, like Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. I mean, 41 novels over 32 years. Just incredible. And the basic idea. A flat planet on the backs of 4 elephants on a giant space turtle. It's completely bonkers. But somehow he used that setup to explore everything. Wizards, trolls, city guards, even Death himself, who, let's face it, is one of the best characters ever written.
Pratchett had this deep, real love for fantasy tropes, But he mixed it with this amazing wit, this comedic irreverence, and underneath it all, incredible political sharpness. His genius was using the absurd to satirize our world. He could comment on, well, everything, policing, the press, politics, philosophy, all while telling a genuinely good fantasy story. That mix of sharp satire and real affection for the world he built. That's pretty unique.
That kind of sustained creativity is something else. But another key innovator was Anne McCaffrey with the Dragonriders of Pern, starting back in '67. And we should note the history here. McCaffrey was the first woman ever to win a Hugo Award for fiction, for Dragonflight. That's a big deal.
A huge deal. And the world building itself is fascinating. It's a great example of genre blending. So Pern is a planet colonized by humans from Earth. Far in the future, that's your sci-fi origin. But the society that develops is basically medieval. And they ride these huge, intelligent, fire-breathing dragons they bond with telepathically. Why? To fight Thread, this deadly fungal spore that rains down from space. It just smoothly fuses a hard sci-fi setup with a heroic fantasy narrative. Anyone writing about dragons since owes something to the complexity she brought to it.
Speaking of books that maybe took a while to find their audience, Hope Merrilies' Lud in the Mist from 1926. It's this kind of overlooked classic that showed fantasy could be modernist, philosophical, beautifully written all at once.
Yeah, Merrilies was part of that British modernist scene. And Lud in the Mist is set in this town, Lud, where the people are very prim, very proper. They've basically outlawed anything to do with fairyland next door, erased it from history. The whole forgetting the magic thing lets Merrilies explore historical erasure, the clash between faith and, everyday life, political repression. It's really smart and quite enchanting, too.
Okay, so bringing it up to the more contemporary scene, there are 2 forces that really stand out, setting the standard for the modern epic. First, George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Started in '96, famously still unfinished, but it completely revitalized high fantasy. The sources really hammer this point. He brought in trailblazing political and psychological realism, built Westeros with so much grit, so much detail, even just the sort of banal brutality of it all. It feels like a real tangible place, almost a parallel history. The key thing is that psychological realism, I think. Martin didn't just give us good versus evil. He made you root for characters who were deeply flawed, morally gray. That was a real shift from the classic epic. You're immersed in this world where power struggles often trump basic morality, and where character flaws can have huge world-changing consequences. That grittiness, that complexity, it made the drama feel so visceral. It paved the way for a lot of the complex political fantasy we see now.
And then finally we get to what's arguably the biggest event in fantasy literature in the last, say, 10 years. N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. Started with the 5th season in 2015. And you just have to highlight the achievement here. Jemisin won the Hugo Award for Best Novel 3 years in a row for those books. First person ever. That's just unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented. And it represents, I think, the current peak of using fantasy to explore really complex political ideas. The world she builds, the stillness, is terrifyingly vivid. It's a single continent constantly racked by seismic events, and society is structured around orogenes, people who can control energy, stop earthquakes. But here's the twist. These incredibly powerful people are feared, enslaved, persecuted by the very society that depends on them to survive. So her work just dives into the absolute darkest corners of systemic oppression, power dynamics, marginalization, using all the tools of fantasy magic, world-shattering disasters, elemental power to deliver this incredibly powerful political commentary. It really feels like she redefined the high fantasy conflict of her time.
So we've gone on quite a journey here. What does this all boil down to for you, the reader? I mean, we've covered so much ground. From the books that basically wrote the rules of high fantasy to surreal adventures, centuries-old Chinese epics, groundbreaking Yoruba folklore, sci-fantasy hybrids, and ending up with the sharp political realism of Martin and Jemisin today. It shows fantasy isn't just some small niche. It's global. It's adaptable. It's a vessel for some of humanity's biggest stories.
That's exactly it. That's the takeaway. Fantasy can be anything: drama, comedy, mystery, adventure, blends history, politics, myth from all over the world across centuries. So it raises this question, maybe for you to think about. If the genre can absorb all of this, all these different styles and perspectives, what's the next big cultural story? Maybe from a place, a perspective we haven't seen much of yet. What story is out there just waiting to be told through that lens of pure imaginative fantasy? Just consider that power imagination put down on paper. What new worlds, what new classics are still waiting for their storyteller?